In a globalized world, conflict, insecurity, famine occurring in other countries impacts on us. Refugees, the threat of terrorism, regional instability crossing borders. One of the reasons British governments have in previous years spent £15 billion per annum on foreign aid. The investigative website Open Democracy has obtained an email which was circulated at the Foreign Office last month and shared it with us. The email outlines percentages of cuts to the foreign aid budget to a raft of different countries, cuts that were discussed here last month. Now, this week we learned that the foreign aid budget to Yemen, for example, is to be drastically cut, but this email would suggest that that could just be the start of it. First on the list is the Sahel, countries across the north of Africa. The proposed reduction here is from £340 million down to just £23 million. Part of the significance of this area for Britain, many of the countries here are transit countries for migrants and refugees to Europe. Next up is Libya, a proposed 63% cut to the aid budget. The list goes on. West Balkans 50%, Nigeria 58%, Lebanon 88%, Somalia 60%, the Democratic Republic of Congo 60%, South Sudan 59%. For Sudan, the email says that the entire CSSF budget could be cut. This relates to money spent on conflict resolution. Then to Syria, 67%, Yemen 45%. We found out this week that the percentage cut for Yemen is higher than quoted in the email, indicating that the proposed reductions in the correspondence might actually be on the conservative side. From Somalia today, this reaction to the revelations.
The impact of 60% cut is going to have a devastating effect on the population, on health, nutrition, and also education and livelihood.
Are you confident that there could be a direct connection in your mind between the reduction in aid and deaths?
Yes.
The government said today that the seismic impact of the pandemic on the UK economy has forced us to take tough but necessary decisions. We remain a world-leading aid donor and we will spend more than £10 billion this year. Now, we knew that something like £4 billion was to be cut from the foreign aid budget this year. The government has said that public finances are under particular strain at the moment, of course, because of the pandemic. The upshot of all of this will be that the government will not meet its obligation of 0.7% of national spending on foreign aid. And so to the politics. Opposition MPs and some government backbenchers have reacted angrily to the proposed cuts, raising questions about whether a vote in Parliament could be defeated. On Tuesday, a foreign minister was unable to confirm whether a vote on the reduction would be brought to the House. There are other broader questions too. How does this square with the Foreign Secretary's stated commitment to morally driven, ethical foreign policy? Also, how temporary will the reduction to foreign aid be post-pandemic?
Well, we bid for a Foreign Office Minister to come on the programme, but they declined. Joining me now are the Conservative MP, Tobias Ellwood, who chairs the Commons Defence Committee, and Rory Stewart, former International Development Secretary, who now lectures on the subject at Yale University. Rory, first, is something more than an election promise being broken here?
Yes, more than that. Remember, this was a legal promise too, so it was enshrined in law, but it's also a promise to other countries. It's about Britain's international reputation. Because this 0.7% was there in law, everybody working in our embassies abroad worked on the assumption that that money was there. And so they will have been very confident when they were dealing with governments across the world, governments in Uganda, governments in DRC, governments in Pakistan, that if they were funding an education program this year, they would be able to fund it next year. This cut has been so completely unexpected. And what it will have done is destroy programs right the way around the world. And the reason for that is that although it sounds like a small cut, so much of the money is already pre-allocated, already tied into commitments to the World Bank and other places, that what you've cut is all the flexible money that you use to your bilateral programs have been cut in many cases, as you say, by 65 or 70%.
People often assume that a lot of foreign aid goes in waste or corruption. Will people die as a result of this?
Yes. I mean, that's a difficult thing to say, but of course that is true. As your report made clear from Somalia, Somaliland, those are places where we're doing emergency feeding programs. Now, of course, the British government, DFID, can't save every life in the world, but it is true that if you have less money, put it bluntly, for feeding babies in Somaliland, some of those babies will die. And I suppose in addition to the moral obligation, there is a question about what Britain thinks it's doing in the world. We talk a lot about global Britain after Brexit, and I'm speaking to the United States, and President Biden is looking for ways to cooperate with other countries. There was a hope, really, that Britain could be a leader on things like climate change and the environment. And sadly, this money is also the money that we would have used to invest in that internationally.
Tobias Ellwood, how much support is there to do this amongst your colleagues?
What, for the cuts themselves?
Yeah.
Well, firstly, let me say hello to my good friend Rory Stewart. It's we miss you and your voice, particularly on issues such as this. Britain has long prided itself on stepping forward when other nations hesitate. You know, we make an effort to understand the world around us, and we retain that means and desire to help shape it. And my concern is that perhaps we don't explain ourselves to the British people well enough, the consequences of when we step back from our involvement across the world. I took a list of the countries that have been affected. In Syria, Daesh will be delighted to learn that we're stepping back. In Lebanon, Hezbollah will be pleased to see that we're no longer participating there. In Somalia, Al-Shabaab will benefit from us being out of the picture there. Likewise, in Nigeria with Boko Haram, and in Libya, Russia, of course, will then fill that vacuum that we leave behind. And in the Sahel, well, we have British troops there working with our French counterparts in Mali to try and keep that place safe. So perhaps we explain it to the British people, the consequences that extremism, terrorism, refugee crisis, migration, the impact on security and the impact on our prosperity will all be affected when we take this retrograde steps.
Right, but are you trying to change the policy, and how likely is that, given, as we've already seen today, they can't even pay the nurses?
Well, this is the dilemma. This is the challenges that we face. But what I'm trying to say, and you heard this from Rory as well, is that there are long-term consequences to Britain's security. Where are the migrants coming from that try to get across to Dover? We need to actually deal with these problems at source. And Rory is absolutely right. You've got President Biden that is stepping forward with greater reinvigorated Western resolve to help solve some of the international challenges. Yemen will come up soon, absolutely, because he is focusing on that country, get a political resolution, get a ceasefire, and then we need to have our aid packages ready to move in. If we haven't got the money there, we cannot participate.
Rory Stewart, I mean, as you look on now, having left frontline politics, what do you think your former colleagues like Tobias Ellwood should do? Should they be more revolutionary if they want to change this policy?
I'm not in the business of telling my former colleagues what to do, but I do think it's also important for the reputation of the Conservative Party to get this right, because this was a manifesto commitment, this was a legal commitment, and you know, we really, it's about promises to the rest of the world, but it's also about promises to the British people. I think Tobias has provided a very, very good account of why international development aid matters. I also think that people who voted Brexit and thought that by doing so they were going to be launching global Britain and putting Britain more on the world stage need to understand that this money is basically what kept Britain on the world stage. In many of the countries in the world, the reason that Britain is relevant is because it is able to participate, it's able to contribute. And if those resources are taken away, then Britain is increasingly turning in on itself at exactly the moment when it needs to be reaching out at the world. At exactly the moment when it's leaving the European Union, it needs to be reaching out to the world, it needs the resources to do that.
Rory Stewart, Tobias Ellwood, thank you both very much.